It was early morning when the first light touched the old buildings of the university. The air was fresh and quiet, with only the sound of footsteps on the path and a few birds calling in the distance. The campus looked peaceful, but inside the main hall, hundreds of students were already rushing from one class to another, trying not to be late. Among them walked a young girl named Maya. She moved quietly, almost unnoticed, carrying a few notebooks pressed against her chest. Her hair was slightly messy from the morning breeze, and her backpack looked a little too heavy for her small frame. But her eyes were bright, full of thought and curiosity. Maya wasn't famous in her university. She wasn't one of those students everyone talked about. She didn't have a large group of friends, and she didn't dress in fancy clothes. She was just one of the many faces people saw in the crowd every day and forgot the next. But if anyone had taken the time to look closer, they would have seen something special in her, something quiet yet powerful. She had always loved learning, especially math. Numbers made sense to her in a way that people didn't. When others struggled to understand formulas and theories, Maya saw patterns and stories inside them. It was like a secret language she could read when no one else could. While many students found math to be dry and difficult, she found it alive and full of wonder. Her classmates sometimes joked that she loved math more than life itself. She didn't mind the teasing. In truth, it made her happy that something so simple and pure could bring her joy. For Maya, math was like art, clean, beautiful, and full of possibilities. Every morning after her classes, she liked to sit under the big tree near the library. That was her quiet place. She would open her old, slightly torn notebook and start writing small equations or sketching patterns that came to her mind. It wasn't always homework. Sometimes it was just thoughts, questions, or puzzles she made up for herself. She didn't think she was special. She didn't think of herself as gifted or brilliant. She just loved solving things. The feeling of working hard on a problem, getting stuck, and then finally finding the answer. It gave her a joy she couldn't put into words. But her days were not always easy. Life at the university was competitive. Many students were from wealthy families, and some of them had private tutors since childhood. Maya came from a small town where her parents ran a small shop. They worked hard so she could study in the city. Every time she felt tired or doubtful, she reminded herself that she wasn't only studying for her own future, but also for her family's hopes. She didn't have the latest phone or fancy gadgets, and sometimes she skipped lunch just to save money for books, but she never complained. Instead, she focused on her studies. Her professors liked her because she always asked deep, thoughtful questions, not to show off but to understand better. One afternoon, during a lecture on advanced mathematics, her professor mentioned a problem that had been discussed for years at the university. It was something that even the brightest students hadn't been able to solve completely. The professor said it was more of an intellectual exercise than an actual expectation. No one really thought a student could solve it. It was too complex. When the class ended, everyone laughed and moved on. But Maya stayed behind. She stood quietly for a few seconds, then approached the board. Her professor, who was packing his notes, looked at her and smiled. "Curious, Maya?" he asked. She nodded shyly. "I just want to understand what makes it so hard," she said softly. The professor chuckled. "That's a good question. Most people don't even want to try." He handed her a printed copy of the problem and added, "Here, take it. It's a beautiful puzzle, even if it's impossible." Maya thanked him and walked out, holding the paper in her hands as if it were something precious. She didn't plan to solve it. She just wanted to see how it worked, how it broke the rules she thought she knew. That night, after finishing her homework, she unfolded the paper and read the question again and again. It didn't make sense at first. It was complicated, full of strange symbols and logic, but something about it drew her in. Days passed. She couldn't stop thinking about the problem. Even when she tried to focus on other work, her mind kept going back to it. She would write notes in the margins of her books, make small calculations between classes, and sketch out patterns on scrap paper. Her roommate noticed and laughed. "You're obsessed with that thing," she said one evening. "You know it's impossible, right?" Maya smiled faintly. "Maybe," she said, "but I just want to see how far I can go." At first, she made no progress. Every path she took led to confusion. Every attempt seemed to fall apart halfway through. But instead of giving up, she grew more determined. Each failure made her want to try again. There were nights when she stayed awake long after midnight, the light from her small desk lamp spilling over open notebooks. Her eyes were tired and her hands ached from writing, but her mind was alive with ideas. Sometimes she would get so lost in thought that she forgot to eat. Once, her roommate found her asleep at the desk with her head resting on a page filled with numbers and lines. But Maya didn't see it as hard work. She saw it as exploration. She wasn't chasing grades or recognition. She just wanted to understand. One rainy morning, as she walked to the library, she overheard a group of students talking about the same problem. They were laughing about how even professors hadn't solved it. One of them said, "If someone from our batch ever does it, I'll buy them a car." Everyone laughed again. Maya smiled quietly but didn't say anything. She didn't care about cars or prizes. For her, the reward was in the journey. Inside the library, she found a quiet corner and started going through old research papers and journals. She wanted to see how others had approached the problem before. The more she read, the more she realized that maybe people had been looking at it the wrong way. Maybe they were missing something small, something simple that was hidden in plain sight. She didn't know it yet, but this quiet moment would become the beginning of something that would change her life. That evening, she walked back to her dorm slowly, the rain falling softly around her. She looked up at the cloudy sky and thought about how strange it was that something so impossible could feel so close. She couldn't explain it, but she felt that there was an answer waiting somewhere, just beyond her reach. When she got back to her room, she sat by the window, opened her notebook, and began to write again. She didn't realize hours were passing. Her roommate fell asleep. The lights went out in the hallway and the campus grew silent. The only sound was the scratching of her pen and the occasional whisper of rain. As the clock neared 2 a.m., she leaned back and rubbed her tired eyes. She had drawn lines and symbols across several pages, each connecting to another like threads in a web. For a moment she smiled. Not because she had found the answer, but because she felt alive. There was something deeply satisfying about chasing an idea, even when you didn't know where it would lead. She closed her notebook and whispered to herself, "Maybe it's not impossible." That thought stayed with her for days. She carried it like a secret, a small spark that kept her going through long classes and lonely evenings. No one knew how much time she was spending on the problem. Her professors saw her as a quiet, hard-working student. Her friends saw her as someone who studied too much. No one saw the fire inside her, the quiet determination that refused to fade. Every great story begins with a moment that seems small. For Maya, it was that simple curiosity, the desire to understand why something couldn't be solved. She had no idea that her question would soon lead to something far bigger than herself, something that would make her name known far beyond the walls of her university. But for now, she was just a young girl sitting under a dim light, lost in numbers, chasing the truth hidden inside them. Days turned into weeks, and Maya's quiet obsession with the problem grew stronger. What had started as simple curiosity had become something she thought about every single day. Even when she was walking between classes or eating lunch, part of her mind was still trying to piece together the puzzle. She saw connections in the most random places, on a blackboard filled with unrelated notes and a pattern of tiles on the floor, even in the rhythm of raindrops on her window. She didn't tell anyone how deep her thoughts had gone. It wasn't that she was hiding anything. She just didn't think anyone would understand. Most of her friends were busy worrying about exams, internships, or social events. They didn't have time to think about an old unsolved math problem that didn't even count for grades. But for Maya, it had become something much more personal. Every evening after classes, she went straight to the library. She had found a small, quiet table, tucked behind a row of tall shelves. It was far from the busy reading areas, and she liked that no one ever disturbed her there. She would spread out her notes, a few books, and her laptop, then start working. Sometimes she'd lose track of time completely. The librarian had to tap her shoulder more than once to remind her the building was closing. Her desk became covered with scribbled pages, formulas, sketches, lines, arrows, circles, and words written so fast they barely looked readable. Every page represented a path she had tried, a direction she had taken in her search for understanding. Most of them led nowhere, but sometimes there was a flicker of progress, a single connection that made her heart race for a moment before fading away again. She wasn't chasing recognition or success. She didn't imagine herself becoming famous or being praised. She just wanted to see if she could do it. There was something deeply satisfying about pushing herself to the limit of what she could understand. It wasn't about being smarter than others. It was about testing her own boundaries. One afternoon, as she sat buried in her notes, her professor happened to pass by. He noticed her through the shelves and smiled. "Still looking at that old riddle?" he asked kindly. Maya looked up, startled. "Oh, yes. I'm just trying to see if I can make sense of some parts," she replied with a shy laugh. He chuckled and leaned slightly toward her table. "You know, many have tried that before. It's quite a challenge, but I admire your persistence. Just don't let it take too much of your time. You have other classes to focus on, too." "I know," she said softly, "but I feel like I'm close to understanding something, even if it's small." The professor nodded with a thoughtful expression. "Sometimes that's how big discoveries begin. Small pieces of understanding." Then he smiled again and walked away. Maya watched him go, feeling encouraged but also a little uncertain. She wondered if he really believed she could find anything or if he was just being kind. Still, his words stayed in her mind. That night, as she worked again, she thought about all the people who had tried solving that problem before her. Professors, researchers, maybe even geniuses whose names were in textbooks. They all had failed. And yet she couldn't let it go. Something deep inside her kept whispering that there was a way, a small door that everyone else had missed. She spent hours staring at equations, rearranging them, breaking them down into smaller parts. Some nights she felt hopeful. Other nights she felt completely lost. There were moments when she thought about giving up, telling herself she was foolish to waste time on something beyond her reach. But every time she tried to stop, her mind pulled her back. It was like the problem had become a part of her, something that refused to let go. Her roommate noticed how much she was changing. "You look tired lately," she said one morning as Maya packed her bag. "You're not sleeping enough." "I'm fine," Maya said with a tired smile. "I just have a lot on my mind." "Still that math thing?" Maya nodded. Her roommate sighed. "You're crazy, but—" "I hope it's worth it," Maya laughed quietly. "Even if I never solve it, it's worth it. I'm learning more than I ever have before." The days blurred together. Lectures, meals, studying, and long nights of writing and thinking. But slowly, almost without her noticing, her understanding of the problem began to deepen. She started seeing patterns she hadn't seen before. Small things that didn't seem important at first began to connect like pieces of a puzzle. One afternoon, as she flipped through a thick reference book, she came across an old research paper written decades ago. The author had approached the same problem from a completely different angle. The theory wasn't perfect. It had been dismissed by later researchers, but one small part of it caught her attention. It was a detail that no one had mentioned in recent studies, a tiny assumption that everyone seemed to accept as true without question. Maya frowned and read the paragraph again. Then again, the more she looked at it, the stranger it seemed. What if this part is wrong? She whispered to herself. Her heart began to beat faster. If that small assumption was flawed, then the whole way people had been approaching the problem could be wrong too. It wouldn't make the old theories useless, but it could open a new path, one no one had explored yet. She quickly pulled out her notebook and started testing the idea. The numbers didn't fit at first, but the concept felt right. It was like trying to tune an instrument. You know it's close, but it needs adjustment. She stayed there until the library lights flickered, signaling closing time. The next few days were a blur. Maya could barely focus in her regular classes. Her notebooks filled up faster than ever. She started writing on the backs of old pages, even on the corners of receipts and spare sheets of paper. Every time she found a new connection, she felt a surge of excitement. But she was careful. She didn't want to rush. She knew that one mistake could ruin everything. Sometimes she'd take a walk around campus to clear her head. The gardens, the sound of students laughing, the sight of people studying on benches, all of it reminded her how small her world had become. While others were living normal university lives, she was chasing an idea that might not even lead anywhere. But deep inside, she felt she was on the edge of something. One evening, as the sun set behind the old clock tower, she sat under her favorite tree, staring at a page full of calculations. The air was cool and quiet, and the golden light fell across her notebook. For the first time, she noticed that one of the equations she had written earlier behaved differently when she applied the new assumption. She checked it again and again. It was small, barely noticeable, but it changed everything. She stared at it for a long time, hardly breathing. Then she smiled slowly. "That's strange," she whispered. "That shouldn't work. But it does." She didn't fully understand it yet, but she knew she had found something real, a small piece of truth hidden in all the confusion. It wasn't the full answer, not yet, but it was the first clear step forward. That night she couldn't sleep. She lay in bed, her mind replaying the equations over and over. Her roommate mumbled in her sleep, unaware that a few feet away Maya's thoughts were racing faster than ever. She felt nervous and excited at the same time. What if she was right? What if she had actually found the key that everyone else had missed? The next morning, she woke up early and went straight to the library again. The building was almost empty, the air still and cold. She sat down, opened her notebook, and began to work. Hours passed like minutes. When her stomach finally growled from hunger, she looked at the clock. It was already afternoon. She didn't even notice. Her hand kept moving across the page as she refined her idea, checking and rechecking every detail. For the first time, the numbers started to align perfectly. The logic made sense. It was like the chaos had finally begun to form a picture. By the time evening came, she leaned back in her chair and looked at her work. Her heart was pounding. She didn't have the full proof yet, but she had a strong foundation. Something inside her whispered that she was getting close, closer than anyone else had been in years. But instead of celebrating, Maya felt strangely calm. She knew the real challenge was only beginning. Solving the problem wasn't just about finding the right answer. It was about proving it, defending it, and making others see what she saw. She packed her things slowly, her notebook tucked carefully under her arm. As she walked out into the cool evening air, she looked up at the darkening sky and smiled softly to herself. "Maybe," she whispered, "it's not impossible after all." And with that thought, she headed back to her dorm, unaware that her quiet discovery would soon shake her whole university in ways no one could have imagined. The days after her small discovery felt different. Everything around Maya seemed to move at the same pace, but inside her, something had changed. She walked through the campus with a quiet sense of purpose. The chatter of students, the laughter echoing in the hallways, the sound of shoes against the floor. It all faded into the background. Her world had narrowed down to one thing, the problem. She no longer saw it as a set of numbers or a challenge. It had become personal, almost like a living thing she had to understand. Each morning she woke up thinking about it, and each night she fell asleep with the equations still swirling in her mind. Her notebook had turned into a map of her journey, filled with ideas, mistakes, small victories, and endless corrections. But progress wasn't easy. For every new insight she found, there were days when everything fell apart. Sometimes, after hours of working, she'd realize that one wrong assumption had ruined the whole chain of reasoning. Those moments were the hardest. She would sit in silence, staring at the pages, her heart sinking with disappointment. It felt like she was climbing a mountain that never ended. Yet, even in frustration, she couldn't let go. She had come too far to stop now. She would take a short walk, breathe, and then start again from scratch. Her persistence became her greatest strength. She wasn't faster or smarter than others. She was simply unwilling to quit. Her friends started noticing her absence from group gatherings. When they called her to hang out, she often said she was busy. Some teased her gently, saying she was married to her math problem. Others just shook their heads, thinking she was wasting her youth on something no one cared about. One evening, her roommate tried to convince her to take a break. "You need to rest, Maya," she said, closing her laptop. "You can't keep doing this every night. You're burning yourself out." Maya looked up from her notebook, her eyes tired but determined. "I know, I feel like I'm so close. Every time I stop, my mind keeps working on it anyway." "I can't help it," her roommate sighed. "You sound obsessed." Maya smiled faintly. "Maybe I am, but obsession is just passion that refuses to give up." That night, long after everyone had gone to bed, Maya sat by the window with a cup of tea and her notebook open in front of her. The campus was quiet, the lights in the nearby buildings flickering off one by one. The moonlight fell softly on her desk and she stared at her equations, tracing the lines with her finger. She wasn't thinking anymore, she was feeling. The problem had become an emotion, a melody she was learning to play by heart. After several minutes, she noticed something. A pattern she had seen before but never paid attention to. Her heart skipped a beat. She looked closer. The same structure appeared in two different parts of the formula, almost like a mirror. It didn't seem important at first, but when she started to follow it, everything began to shift. She quickly grabbed her pen and began to write. One equation led to another. The lines flowed faster than she could think. It was as if her mind had been waiting for this exact moment. Her breathing grew shallow. Her hand trembled slightly as she filled page after page. Then suddenly she stopped. She stared at what she had written. The numbers aligned perfectly, each step flowing naturally into the next. It wasn't complete yet, but it was beautiful. It was the kind of beauty that only truth can have, simple, unexpected, undeniable. Her hands were shaking. "No way," she whispered to herself. "Can it really be this?" She spent the rest of the night checking her steps again and again. By dawn, her eyes were red, her mind exhausted, but her heart was alive with excitement. She had found something solid, something that might be the missing key. When morning came, she went to class as usual, pretending everything was normal. But inside, she could barely sit still. Her mind kept replaying the solution. After class, she went straight to her professor's office. She hesitated at the door for a moment, took a deep breath, and knocked. "Come in," said a friendly voice. The professor looked up from his desk and smiled when he saw her. "Ah, Maya. How are you? Still thinking about that problem?" She nodded nervously. "Yes, sir, actually. I think I might have found something." He raised an eyebrow. "Oh, that's interesting. Sit down." Maya sat across from him and opened her notebook. Her hands trembled slightly as she showed him the pages. "I found this pattern here," she explained softly. "And when I applied it to this part of the equation, something unexpected happened. It simplified in a way I hadn't seen before." The professor leaned forward, adjusting his glasses. He studied her work silently. The room was so quiet she could hear her own heartbeat. After a few minutes, he looked up at her. "This is unusual," he said slowly. "Can you walk me through it?" She nodded and began explaining each step. Her voice was steady at first, but as she continued, her confidence grew. The professor asked questions, tested her reasoning, and tried to find gaps. But each time, Maya answered calmly, showing her logic clearly. By the time she finished, the professor leaned back in his chair, deep in thought. He murmured. "You've done something very interesting here. I'll need to check this more closely, but it's certainly worth attention." Maya felt a wave of relief and nervous excitement. "Do you think it could be right?" she asked quietly. He smiled. "It might be. I'm not saying it's a full solution yet, but this approach is definitely new." "Where did you learn to think like this?" She hesitated and shrugged. "I just kept looking at it until it started to make sense." The professor chuckled softly. "Sometimes that's the best kind of learning." He promised to review her work and invited her to come back in a few days. As she left the office, her legs felt light as if she was walking on air. She couldn't stop smiling. For the first time, someone else had seen what she saw. That night, she didn't even try to sleep. Her mind was spinning with possibilities. She began refining her notes, organizing them more clearly, adding explanations and examples. She wanted to make sure everything made sense. She didn't want anyone to dismiss it as luck or coincidence. 2 days later, her professor called her back. When she entered his office, he was sitting with 2 other faculty members, both senior professors from the mathematics department. Maya froze for a moment, unsure if she should be scared or excited. "Please have a seat," her professor said warmly. "I showed your work to my colleagues. We found it quite intriguing." The older professor adjusted his glasses and looked at her. "Your idea challenges a long-standing assumption. That's bold for a student, but boldness is what moves mathematics forward." Maya sat silently, listening as they discussed her approach. They asked her technical questions, some of which made her pause and think deeply, but she answered honestly, explaining how she reached each conclusion. The discussion lasted nearly an hour. By the end, all 3 professors looked impressed. Her main professor smiled. "Maya, I think you may be onto something significant. I'd like to help you formalize this. With your permission, we can work together to prepare a proper paper." Maya's eyes widened. "Really?" she asked softly. "Yes," he said. "It's too early to say where it will lead, but it's worth exploring. You've done excellent work." When she left the office that day, the world around her seemed brighter. The trees, the sound of footsteps, the laughter of students all felt different, almost unreal. She had spent months in silence, working alone, doubting herself countless times. And now suddenly people were listening. She sat under her favorite tree again, the same spot where she had first started. She looked down at her hands and smiled. They were trembling, but not from fear this time, from pure joy. It wasn't the end of her journey. She knew there was still much to prove and her idea might still face challenges, but for the first time she felt like she belonged, not just as a student, but as someone who had added a new thought to the world. As the sun dipped behind the buildings and the campus began to glow with evening lights, Maya whispered softly to herself, "Maybe I really can do this." The breeze rustled the pages of her notebook and she smiled, unaware that her quiet discovery was about to spark a wave of curiosity that would reach far beyond her small corner of the world. The news began to spread slowly at first. It started inside the mathematics department, whispered between classrooms and discussed quietly among professors. Someone had said that a student, a quiet girl from the second year, had made progress on the century-old problem no one could solve. At first, most people didn't believe it. It sounded like a rumor, the kind of story that gets exaggerated as it moves from one person to another. But as the professors began checking her work and sharing it among themselves, curiosity turned into astonishment. Maya's name started appearing in faculty emails, in conversations during lunch breaks, even in research meetings. Maya didn't know any of this at first. She was still in the library every evening, sitting at her usual spot, rewriting her proof neatly and checking every single step. She wanted everything to be perfect. When her professor finally called her again, his tone was different, more serious, more respectful. "Maya," he said, "we'd like you to present your work to the department this Friday." Her heart skipped a beat. "Present?" she asked nervously. "To everyone?" He smiled kindly. "Yes, it's an informal presentation, but some of our senior professors will attend. They'd like to hear it from you directly." Maya froze. The thought of standing in front of all those brilliant minds made her stomach twist. She wasn't used to attention. She wasn't the kind of student who spoke loudly or confidently in public. She preferred to sit in the back of the class and listen. But she also knew this was a chance she couldn't run from. "I'll do it," she said softly, her voice shaking a little. The next few days were some of the longest of her life. She practiced speaking alone in her room, explaining each step of her solution in simple words. She recorded herself, listened, and tried again. Her roommate watched her pacing back and forth with a mix of pride and amusement. "You look terrified," her roommate said one night. "I am," Maya admitted, "but I have to try. It's not about me anymore. It's about the work." Friday came faster than she expected. The presentation room was large, with rows of seats filled with professors, graduate students, and a few curious undergraduates who had heard about the girl who solved the impossible problem. The walls were lined with tall blackboards filled with old equations, and the air smelled faintly of chalk. Maya stood near the board holding her notes tightly. Her hands were slightly cold. Her professor introduced her briefly, saying, "Today, one of our students will share an unexpected approach to a well-known problem. I think you'll find it interesting." She stepped forward, her voice soft at first. She began by describing the history of the problem, the many attempts made over the decades, and the small details she had questioned, the assumption everyone had accepted as true. As she explained how she approached it differently, the room grew quiet. At first, some professors had skeptical looks on their faces, but as Maya continued, showing each step clearly, their expressions began to change. A few leaned forward. One of them started taking notes. Another whispered something to a colleague and nodded in disbelief. Maya didn't notice. She was too focused on explaining what she had discovered. Her nervousness slowly faded, replaced by calm confidence. The math spoke for itself. When she finished, there was silence for a few long seconds. Then one of the senior professors spoke up. "Could you repeat that transformation you did in step 6? He asked. Maya nodded and walked back to the board. She rewrote the equation step by step, explaining the logic behind it. The professor stared at it for a while, then smiled. "That's correct," he said quietly. Another professor raised a question, trying to test her reasoning. Maya answered patiently, showing how she had cross-checked every case. The discussion went on for nearly an hour. By the end, the same professors who had walked in doubtful were nodding in respect. When it was over, the room filled with soft applause, hesitant at first, then louder. Maya stood there a little stunned, not knowing what to do. Her professor smiled proudly and said, "Well done, Maya. Very well done." After the presentation, several professors came up to her, congratulating her and asking for copies of her notes. Some students who had never spoken to her before suddenly wanted to know more. She felt overwhelmed but happy, not because of the attention, but because her work had finally been understood. That evening, as she walked back through the courtyard, the air was cool and calm. The sunset painted the sky with colors of gold and orange. She sat on a bench near the fountain, closed her eyes and took a deep breath. For the first time in months, she felt light. But the story didn't stop there. Over the next few weeks, her paper was formally reviewed by the university's academic committee. They tested her logic, searched for flaws, and compared it to existing research. Every test came back clear. Her approach was not only correct but elegant, a new way of seeing the problem that others had missed for decades. Word began to spread beyond the campus. A visiting professor from another university read her paper and mentioned it in a seminar. Soon other researchers were reaching out to verify her work. Maya didn't know how to handle all the attention. Emails started arriving from people she had never met. Mathematicians, journalists, even students from other countries asking for advice. Her professor helped her manage everything. "Don't let it overwhelm you," he said gently. "Focus on the work. Let the rest follow naturally." But even as praise came pouring in, not everyone believed it at first. A few older scholars questioned how a student could solve something that experts had failed to do for years. One of them wrote a harsh comment online, saying it was probably a coincidence or a simplified version of the real problem. When Maya read that, she felt her heart sink for a moment. Doubt crept in again. She wondered if maybe they were right. Maybe she had just gotten lucky. But her professor reassured her. "Criticism is part of discovery," he said. "If your work is real, it will stand on its own." He was right. When those same critics tried to disprove her work, they couldn't. The math held strong. Her reasoning was solid, and soon the tone of discussion changed. What started as skepticism turned into admiration. One morning, she received an email from the head of the university. It was short but heartfelt. "You have brought pride to our institution. We would like to honor you at the next academic ceremony." Maya read it twice, unable to believe it. She called her parents immediately. Her mother cried on the phone, her voice trembling with pride. Her father kept saying, "We knew you could do it," even though she knew they had never imagined something like this. The ceremony took place in the large auditorium. The room was filled with professors, students, and staff. When they called her name, the crowd applauded warmly. She walked up to the stage, her heart pounding. The head of the university handed her a certificate of recognition and said, "This young woman has reminded us that curiosity and persistence are just as powerful as experience." Maya smiled shyly as flashes from cameras lit the stage. It didn't feel real. She looked out into the crowd and saw her professor smiling proudly in the front row. She gave a small nod of thanks. That night, she sat by her dorm window holding the certificate in her hands. The city lights glowed in the distance. She thought about the long nights, the moments of doubt, the pages filled with mistakes, and the countless hours spent alone in silence. All of it had led to this moment. But more than pride, she felt gratitude for her curiosity, for her professors who believed in her, and for the problem itself. It had tested her patience, her strength, and her belief in herself. As the clock struck midnight, she whispered to herself, "It was never about being the best. It was about not giving up." She smiled and closed her eyes, unaware that her story was already inspiring students across the country. Articles were being written about her discovery. Professors were using her work as a new teaching example, and in classrooms far away, other young students were looking at her photo and thinking, "If she could do it, maybe I can too." After the ceremony, life for Maya didn't return to the quiet routine she had once known. The university halls seemed different now. People who had barely noticed her months ago now greeted her with smiles, sometimes with awe in their eyes. Students who had once teased her for spending hours alone in the library now asked questions about her work, eager to understand what she had discovered. It was overwhelming at first. Maya never wanted attention. She had only ever wanted to solve the problem, to understand it. But suddenly she was at the center of it all. Emails arrived daily from professors, researchers, and even students from other universities, asking for her notes, her explanation, or advice on approaching similar challenges. Some were polite, some were formal, some were filled with excitement she could almost feel through the words on the screen. She read every message carefully, replying whenever she could. Sometimes she stayed awake late into the night just answering questions, guiding people, and sharing what she had learned. Her discovery had become more than a solution to a problem. It had become a spark, something that encouraged others to think differently, to challenge assumptions, to believe that even the most difficult questions could be approached with patience and persistence. Despite the attention, Maya remained humble. She didn't boast or flaunt her achievement. When asked in interviews about her success, she would always smile softly and say, "I just kept looking until I saw something others hadn't noticed." Persistence matters more than brilliance. She wanted people to understand that anyone, with enough curiosity and determination, could make a difference. Her professors encouraged her to continue her research, and soon she was invited to collaborate on other challenging problems. The same quiet girl who had once been overlooked was now part of research teams, contributing to discussions with senior mathematicians and scholars. She learned more in these collaborations than she ever had in her earlier studies, and her confidence grew. But Maya didn't let her newfound recognition change who she was. She still found time to sit under the old tree near the library, to write in her notebook, and to think quietly about numbers and patterns. Even with her life suddenly full of opportunities, she never forgot the nights she had spent alone, staring at equations under a small lamp, wondering if she would ever make sense of them. Her friends, who had initially doubted her obsession with the problem, now looked at her with respect and admiration. Some of them even admitted they had never truly understood her dedication. But Maya never judged them. She knew everyone's journey was different, and she was grateful for their support even if it had been distant at first. As weeks turned into months, the impact of her work continued to grow. Academic journals published her papers, detailing her approach and the elegant solution she had found. Researchers in other countries cited her work. Invitations arrived for lectures, conferences, and workshops. Young students started following her journey, seeing in her a symbol of what perseverance could achieve. Maya was careful with her time, balancing her studies with these new responsibilities. She discovered that solving a problem wasn't just about finding the answer. It was also about sharing it, explaining it, and inspiring others to try. She found joy in seeing others light up when they understood a concept, the same way she had felt when she first glimpsed the key idea in the old problem. One afternoon, she was asked to give a talk at a conference for promising young mathematicians. Standing on the stage, she looked out at the audience of eager faces. Some were older, some were younger, some were nervous, some confident, but all were waiting to hear what she had to say. She began by telling the story of her journey, not focusing on fame or recognition, but on the quiet hours spent alone, the mistakes she had made, and the persistence that had kept her going. She shared the lessons she had learned. Curiosity is powerful, doubts are natural, and small insights can lead to big discoveries if one is willing to follow them. As she spoke, she noticed students nodding, eyes shining with excitement. Some whispered to each other, "Maybe we can do this too." Others wrote notes furiously, capturing every word. Maya realized that her work had become more than a solution. It had become inspiration. Later, after the talk, a young student approached her with wide eyes. "I always thought problems like this were impossible," the student said softly. "But you proved it's not. Thank you for showing me that it's possible." Maya smiled gently. "You don't need to wait for someone else to solve it. You just need to look carefully, keep thinking, and never give up." That night, as she walked back to her dorm, Maya reflected on everything that had happened. She thought about the long nights filled with doubts, the moments of frustration, and the tiny sparks of understanding that had kept her going.
She realized that solving the problem had changed more than her life.
It had changed her perspective. She had learned patience, resilience, humility, and the joy of discovery. Her parents called her later, and her mother's voice trembled with emotion. "You've done something incredible," she said. "We always believed in you, but this is beyond what we imagined." Her father added, "Not only did you solve the problem, but you've also inspired others. We are so proud." Maya listened quietly, feeling warmth spread through her chest. "I just kept going," she said softly. "I never thought about being famous or recognized. I just wanted to understand." In the following months, Maya continued to grow as both a student and a thinker. She took on new challenges, explored different areas of mathematics, and mentored younger students who were eager to learn. Her life was busy, sometimes overwhelming, but it was fulfilling in a way she had never imagined. The university began featuring her story in newsletters and on social media. The girl who solved the impossible problem became a phrase people used, not as a nickname but as a symbol of curiosity, dedication, and courage. Maya didn't mind the attention, but she never let it define her. For her, the journey had always been the reward. One quiet evening, she sat once again under her favorite tree, looking at her old notebook. The pages were filled with numbers, sketches, and calculations from months ago. She smiled, remembering the moments of doubt, the mistakes, and the tiny breakthroughs. She realized that what made her achievement meaningful wasn't just the solution itself. It was the effort, the curiosity, the refusal to give up, and the understanding that learning and discovery are journeys, not just destinations. Maya understood something else too. Her story was bigger than her. It was now inspiring other students to dream, to persevere, and to believe that they could make a difference no matter how impossible something seemed. She closed the notebook, holding it gently. Outside, the campus was quiet, the sun setting in warm shades of orange and pink. The breeze brushed against her face, and for a moment she felt a deep, peaceful contentment. She had changed her world, and in doing so, had reminded others that curiosity, persistence, and courage are more powerful than anyone can imagine. As night fell, she whispered softly to herself, "If I could do this, anyone can. All it takes is patience, belief, and never stopping." Her journey was far from over, but she had already left a mark, not just on her university, not just on the world of mathematics, but on the hearts and minds of everyone who dared to dream, to question, and to try. And in that quiet, hopeful moment, Maya realized that the hardest problems aren't obstacles. They are invitations. Invitations to grow, to explore, and to discover the extraordinary potential within oneself. The story of the young girl who solved the hardest problem would be told for years, not just as a tale of brilliance, but as a story of courage, persistence, and the quiet power of a determined heart. Months had passed since Maya's breakthrough became known across the university. While her peers were returning to their usual routines, Maya's life had changed in subtle but profound ways. She was no longer just a student. She had become a symbol of curiosity and persistence. Invitations to speak at conferences, write for journals, and mentor younger students filled her schedule. Yet she still found herself searching for quiet moments beneath her favorite tree, notebook in hand. One afternoon, while reviewing a set of advanced problems with a group of students, Maya realized how much she had grown. She could see connections that once would have escaped her notice, and she felt a newfound confidence in her ability to tackle even more difficult questions. Yet she also recognized the responsibility her discovery had brought. Every question she answered, every explanation she gave, could influence a student's belief in their own abilities. That realization was humbling. Maya also faced new challenges. Some of the problems she now explored were even more complex, stretching the limits of her understanding. There were nights when she sat in the dim light of her dorm, pencils scattered across her desk, staring at pages full of equations, wondering if she would ever find the answers. But unlike before, she no longer doubted herself entirely. She had experienced the triumph of discovery and knew the value of persistence. Failure was no longer a threat, but a step in the learning process. Outside of academics, Maya began to notice her personal growth. She interacted more confidently with her professors and peers. She spoke up in seminars, contributed ideas during research discussions, and learned to navigate the sometimes intimidating world of academic politics. Yet she remained grounded, remembering the long nights of quiet work when no one believed in her. Those nights had shaped her determination and humility. Her success also inspired her to think beyond mathematics. Maya became interested in mentoring programs for students from small towns who felt overlooked or underestimated. She realized that talent often exists where no one expects it, and that guidance and encouragement could change a life. Every week she met with students, helping them develop not only their skills, but also their confidence. She told them the story of her own journey, emphasizing that curiosity and perseverance mattered more than natural brilliance. One day, as she walked through the campus courtyard, She noticed a small group of students huddled over a notebook, deep in discussion. Their expressions reminded her of herself months ago. Curious, determined, slightly nervous. She approached quietly, observing for a few moments, then gently offered a suggestion. Their eyes lit up. For a moment, she saw a reflection of her younger self, eager, persistent, and quietly unstoppable. The university continued to celebrate her discovery, inviting her to seminars and lectures, but Maya no longer sought recognition. She found her fulfillment in understanding new ideas, helping others, and embracing challenges that stretched her mind and spirit. She discovered that the joy of discovery wasn't in being praised, but in the process itself, the struggle, the insight, and the quiet moments of revelation. As the years passed, Maya's work gained international attention. Scholars from around the world studied her approach, adapted it to new problems, and credited her ingenuity, yet she remained the same quiet girl at heart, finding solace under her favorite tree, notebook open, mind alive with questions. She understood that discovery was a journey without an endpoint. Each answer led to new questions, each insight to new possibilities. Even as she looked back on her first great achievement, she realized it had been about far more than solving a problem. It had been about perseverance, self-belief, and the courage to explore where others feared to go. Her journey had taught her that obstacles are invitations to grow, that doubt can be a friend if it drives curiosity, and that one determined mind can inspire countless others. On a quiet evening, she sat under the tree, watching the sunset paint the sky with gold and orange. Her notebook lay open on her lap, filled with new ideas she was eager to explore. She thought about the students she had mentored, the papers she had written, and the lives her discovery had touched. A gentle breeze rustled the pages as if whispering encouragement. Maya smiled. She had started as a quiet girl with a question that seemed impossible. Now she was a young woman, whose curiosity had not only solved a problem, but had sparked a ripple of inspiration far beyond herself. And she knew without a doubt that her journey was far from over. There were more questions to ask, more problems to tackle, and more minds to inspire. She closed her notebook gently and whispered to herself, "This is only the beginning." And with that thought, she stood, walked toward the university library, and embraced the endless possibilities that lay ahead, ready to face every challenge with the same quiet determination that had carried her from obscurity to discovery, from doubt to inspiration, and from a solitary question to a legacy that would last for years to come.